two cacti and also bookending two cacti. So this is a really great panel. I'm glad that we've got this group together. This is called Moving Toward an Equitable Energy Future. And we have Dana Harmon here to moderate from Juniper Advisory Group. Thank you, Dana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel on moving towards an equitable energy future. My name is Dana Harmon. I'm the principal and founder of Juniper Advisory Group and also have the pleasure of serving as a fellow with the Energy Institute here at UT under Brian's leadership. And I have the great pleasure of moderating our discussion today with three esteemed colleagues, each doing really incredible work to advance an equitable and just energy transition. With us today, we have Steve Brown, who is the founder and board officer of the Clean Energy Fund of Texas, Maria Reyes, who's the deputy director of Commission Shift, and Mr. John Hall, who serves as the president and CEO of Houston Advanced Research Center. Can you hear me okay? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Each of their bios is really impressive and is available on the website for Energy Week, so please feel free to learn more about their backgrounds there. We welcome each of you and thank you very much for being here today. So there's been a lot of discussion at Energy Week around policies for decarbonization and our energy future. And as governments and corporations are implementing those policies and strategies to address the impacts of climate change, we have to make sure that we're mindful about ensuring that those communities that those solutions are equitable for communities that have been marginalized or disproportionately impacted by economics and energy policies of the past. Climate solutions have to stem from strong relationships with local communities and be developed with them, not simply for them. A previous panel today talked about the opportunities presented by the Inflation Reduction Act. And in addition, for the first time in our nation's history, the federal government has made it a goal for 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments or covered programs to flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. This is known as the Justice 40 Initiative. To ensure these benefits flow as we intend, we need collaborative frameworks to help governments, corporations, and communities build regional capacity and the connective infrastructure to align solution creation towards an energy transition that is truly just and equitable. Each of our panelists have prepared some opening remarks around this topic, and then we'll go into a moderated discussion and save some time for Q&A at the end. So Steve, can you give us the pleasure of kicking us off, please?
Thank you so much, Dana. Can you all hear me all right? Good, perfect. Thank you all for hanging around this afternoon. I understand we're one of the last panels that separates you from the jazz and fun afterwards. So hope to be entertaining over the course of the next hour or so. Now I'm going to try to find my slides somewhere in here, and I'm assuming that's the slide deck? Okay, so just keep going. Okay, sorry. Even better. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Yeah, so I've put together some quick slides so I wouldn't have to commit all of this to memory and free my head up to do other things. But I want to first introduce our organization. I'm the founder and board chair of the Clean Energy Fund of Texas, and we were created as the state's nonprofit green bank to deploy capital into the disadvantaged communities that Dana talked about so that we can begin to eradicate energy poverty. And so today, I'm going to talk a bit about energy poverty, energy burdens, energy insecurity. All of those descriptors somewhat describe the same element in our energy landscape, particularly on the demand side of energy. They all represent energy poverty, and burdens and security are just different metrics and how to define what energy poverty is. Before I continue, how many folks in the room have even heard of the phrase energy poverty? Oh, wow. Which is why you all stuck around to hear this. That's great. That's great. It should have been the other ones who left. So we're going to talk about energy burdens, more so than poverty. And obviously, when we speak of energy burdens, we're talking about any situation where a household is spending, above 6% of their annual income on energy costs, right? Where the median burden for most families is around 2.9%. So 6% is considerably more for the families who can least afford it. And so what we do is our goals are to mitigate the climate crisis, to eliminate energy poverty, and then use capital deployment as a way to catalyze economic development, grow green jobs, and really accelerate the flow of green capital into these disadvantaged communities, and hopefully have that ripple effect where these communities can be an active participant in the energy future in real time, despite perhaps being underbanked or unbanked, that we can deploy capital in a way to accelerate their position in the energy future as well. And again, here we define what the burden is, the energy burden, and obviously in Texas, it's a pretty big deal, right? You got 4 million families in the state who would qualify as living with the energy burden, and you can see where it's defined by HUD. And then, one quick thing to mention about this. So, not only are we taking a second to observe the state of affairs for these families as they deal with these burdens, we also recognize that in dealing with these burdens, they oftentimes have to make trade-offs, very difficult trade-offs, between paying their energy bill or buying groceries or buying medicine, transportation, clothing, right? It is a serious trade-off that many of us don't even have to think about on a day-to-day basis, not to mention the other trade-off, which is, do I even turn on the darn thing to begin with? Can I even afford to turn on the AC in these hot summer months? Or can I afford to turn on the heat in cold winter months? Again, things that we don't have to think about in most situations, most families in Texas, but the way that impacts the quality of life for so many Texans on a seasonal basis, and might I add, also the trauma that causes to see the weather reports and to, week out have to think to yourself, it's going to be hot as hell this weekend. We're going to be home all day this weekend. We cannot turn on the AC. And if we do, we got to set it at 78, 77 degrees at a rate or temperature that would seem unfathomable for most families. But the trauma of that is an additional layer on the trauma that people who are in poverty already live with. So we're saying a whole nother layer of trauma. I guess it goes without saying that being poor is traumatic, okay? I assume, if you aren't poor, you probably know someone who's poor, or you've been poor. Being poor is traumatic. And there are all these different layers that add to that complexity that can be mitigated. And really that is the work that we're trying to do. We are a poverty eliminating nonprofit masquerading as a green bank, is what I tell some people. So the premise of the models that we are seeking to bring to life is looking at how we might underwrite improvements on homes and buildings for small businesses and families in a way that allows them to retake a cash flow positive position through those investments. So for instance, as you can see, before an upgrade, an energy bill could be X. And then once the investment's made to make those changes to that property, not only are the energy bills lower, but the repayment of the investment also is below what they were paying to begin with. And so that's freedom. That delta there, where you see the immediate savings net repayment, that's freedom for a lot of families. Not only are they not just breaking even, but they can begin to take a cash flow positive position for their own households. And what does that mean? That means that those trade-offs we talked about before, we're able to make better decisions about those trade-offs. That means that could be a savings account, that can be investments, that can be a game changer for so many families, and it's so very simple. We want to be able to be in a position where we can show the private lenders that although folks might be poor, they might be considered credit risk based on whatever their proprietary models are for underwriting. This isn't as risky as it may seem, right? A $10,000, $15,000 loan to make energy efficiency improvements for lighting and insulation and window sealing and tint, maybe even some solar, some battery. That is not as risky of an investment as these lenders otherwise might think. And so the idea is that we can be used as a catalyst to open up new markets that allow for private investment to come in to help us in this goal. But as you can see, the reduction in electricity consumption can reduce almost by a third, just by how we deploy capital in these communities. And then lastly, I want to make sure that I mention that the goal of mitigating and eliminating poverty isn't just on the demand side of the equation. It's also on how can we allow for that delta to be used as an investment into other green infrastructure that's taken place in these communities, whether it's community solar or microgrids. And it doesn't have to be a $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 investment. $100, $200 investment into a community solar project in your community allows you the ability to start to create wealth in that community for these families. So it's not just a demand side obstacle, it's our opportunity. It's also a wealth creation opportunity coupled with the job creation aspect in those communities as well. And so lastly, as we talk about the opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act, the $27 billion for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is one of those elements that will help to facilitate this capital deployment into communities throughout the country. We're obviously built and equipped to be recipients of those funds and work with cities and counties throughout the state and address these issues and helping to design products and plans through which this money can be deployed at the local level. We can begin making the changes and seeing the improvements that we all seek to achieve. And we expect those awards to be deployed, those awards to be made sometime in September of next year. I think that's it. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Is this working okay? This mic, can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm sorry. So one of the things that I found so interesting about what you said, I had the opportunity to serve as the executive director of the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. And back in 2016, when we started talking about some of these issues, if we'd asked that same question to this audience, I think we would have gotten 2 people raising their hand about awareness of energy poverty. So thank you for your work and the work of others to raise awareness of this topic, and for the audience for your interest. Maria, can you tell us a bit about Commission Shift?
Can you all hear me? Because I can speak louder.
Oh, no.
Now I can be heard. Yay. Okay. I'm the Deputy Director of Commission Shift. Commission Shift is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to reform oil and gas oversight here in the state of Texas. The state of Texas is, in the state of Texas, we have this agency called the Railroad Commission. And regardless of its name, that is the agency that regulates oil and gas. Its mission is to safeguard our natural resources, be concerned with the safety and health of Texans, and of course, motivate the economic side of oil and gas production. However, Commission Shift came about because this is not happening. Our natural resources are not protected. Our environment is being destroyed. The health of our Texan communities is being affected. And of course, government is being transformed into something that is exclusive to industry. And they tend to kind of value profit more than the people of Texas. Now, I was elated that commissionship was invited because I could come and tell you the great importance that these organizations have when it comes to equality. And that is, we kind of sit in the middle of the public sector and the private sector. And whatever they both fail at, we end up carrying the burden in order to try and bring about when it comes to good governance. What do we call good governance? Good governance is government that is responsive to people, that is accountable to people, that is inclusive, and that is transparent. And all of those things, the Railroad Commission fails at. Now, the Railroad Commission is a very unique agency, but I need you to look at it as an agency, just like in many aspects, serves to have the jurisdiction of regulation of many elements having to do with energy transition. This means that you, as a member of the public, you, as a member of the private sector, the industry, you, as a member of the civic sector where the nonprofits sit, you have to pay attention to what they do. The Railroad Commission is a leader in setting oil prices. And because of that, they are very well observed globally when it comes to how we regulate oil and gas. And this includes emissions, this includes how we handle orphan wells, and this includes the new search for more authority that they are engaging with, which has to do with carbon capture. They are the agency that is going to have primacy over that authority. So because of these, they are at the center of this energy expansion, energy transition, and they are very much pro-industry and pro-profit. Now, one of the things that came about is this idea of environmental justice values. And these environmental justice values set a standard that industry is supposed to follow in order to continue doing business. But unfortunately, we have to be realistic. This was a presidential signature document, an executive order that is temporary. And it's only influential when it comes to, are you applying for funds that you are going to take advantage when it comes to investing on energy transition, right? Because of this, we have to be cognizant that this is something that they are going to have to consider at this time. What is environmental justice values? It is basically upholding the dignity of self-rule. What does this mean? People want to be informed. People want to choose, have the freedom to choose. And most importantly, people want to be part of the decision-making process. This is what environmental justice values means. But it's going to be left to nonprofits and to the public in general to ensure that these values that we are introducing into this process of energy transition become embedded beyond the presidential administration. So I am here to encourage you with a loud voice, thank you for my microphone working, that these values need to be considered, because unfortunately we have to be realistic, truthful to ourselves. We have to become conscious of the fact that there are communities within the state of Texas that carry the cost of energy transition, energy evolution, and all types of energy thinking that you're thinking. Okay, we can identify these communities to continue suffer this same development over and over again We're talking about cancer. We're talking about difficulty breathing. We're talking about losing land where we can feed ourselves. We're talking about dirty air. We're talking about dirty water, and these are essential for our life. So thank you.
Maria, thank you. Thank you so much for those comments. John, we'll turn it over to you now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I was reflecting on what Maria was saying about the significant challenges that exist in this space as we begin to think about how we can move forward to forge effective solutions to address the very challenging issues that she outlined. And on the one hand, I'm optimistic. On the other hand, I'm concerned. But let me come back to that. I think that the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, provides substantial resources that if could be directed to underserved and disadvantaged communities and sustained, for example, over the next 10 years, there is the opportunity for significant progress, but it's not guaranteed. And an incredible amount of work has got to be done for that to become a reality. It seems to me that in order to create a foundation for that potential progress to be made, there is the imperative, it is imperative that we engage with communities at the local level, spend time with them, come to understand the problems that they're dealing with, gaining their trust, which requires much investment in terms of time. There is the potential opportunity to forge community-based solutions to be able to move forward to address the multitude of problems that exist. I think the challenge is significant because a lot of the folks we want to serve and potentially benefit from all of this are very, very busy. They don't have time to think about this as they go out to make jobs. And so it's important to figure out where we meet them and begin to engage with them. Having said that, I think all of this potential funding create the potential opportunity to work at the community level with support from local officials and various nonprofits and so forth to try to focus communities on the concept of utilizing all of these potential resources to create within these communities that have been the place where the greatest harm of energy have been experienced and continue to be experienced, create the notion and the concept and reality of benefit hubs, where we work with as many partners as we can to bring in funding to address the multitude of issues that exist. The energy burden issue that Steve talked about, the health and the educational challenges, the housing challenges, being willing to pull together, get out of the usual network that you work with and pull together broad-based alliances and partnerships, all focused on the people that have had to bear the brunt of energy impacts in society for over 100 years. And then the other challenge is that oftentimes you got to work with these folks who are very, very busy to put in place the social infrastructure that's necessary in order to even to enable them to be in a position to bring in the funding that they desperately need to address the concerns that they're having to deal with. and I'll share this and then I'll let Dan ask us questions. The energy industry in this country and around and in Texas that we still have was brought into existence, particularly in 1901 with the discovery of oil at Spindletop, that has grown dramatically and provided tremendous wealth for companies and great jobs for millions and millions of people. That same year, where one of the most powerful industry in society was created, that same year, the Texas legislature passed a law that severely restricted the right of African Americans and Latinos to participate in the political process. And if you study politics and policy and how government work, there is a direct correlation between the political clout that groups and organizations and communities possess and the benefits that flow to them. And because of that political disenfranchisement deliberately undertaken, all of the ills, all of the challenges, and all of the problems that exist in communities suffering with energy inequities and environmental justice was put into motion because the very people that we're now concerned about were not allowed to be at the table. And the reality of that 100 years of disenfranchisement is the backdrop that we are now trying to move forward and build a progressive movement of delivering benefits to these communities. I'm optimistic, I'm encouraged, but it is very challenging. And unless these resources are sustained, not just for the next 2 years, but for the next 6 years, the next 10 years, the next 14 years, the next 20 years, we will be talking about the same issues 20 years from now, and progress will not have been made. And that's the challenge I think that is before us. And I hope to God that we are able to sustain the opportunities for progress and really deliver benefits to the most disadvantaged persons in our society.
Thank you, John. And thanks to each of you for those comments. I'd like to pull on a thread that I think each of you touched on a little bit, and I think maybe worth expanding. You know, at Energy Week, there's been a lot of talk about technical innovation in the energy sector, and we're talking about hydrogen and advancements in distributed energy resources, solar and battery storage and things like that. I think there's a growing acknowledgement that really we need social innovation as well as technical innovation to advance towards a more just and equitable energy future. And Maria, I loved your comments about environmental justice values and the idea that we need to find ways that people can be part of the decision-making processes that are affecting them. We talked a bit about Justice 40 earlier and the opportunities that initiative provides. One of DOE's 8 policy priorities around Justice 40 is this idea of energy democracy and participation in energy decision-making. I would love for each of you maybe to comment a bit on what does that mean to you and what does that look like in practice in your space, and in any order that you'd like, please.
Well, it's a very important concept, and it depends on where you're working. But it seemed to me, with regard to those communities suffering from environmental justice and equity challenges, they historically, for good reason, have been very concerned about the emissions that they are subjected to that pose serious health and death challenges. As I talk to some of those folks, they are excited about the opportunity of cleaner energy resources coming online and being available and economical. They see that energy sources that are zero emitting or where emissions are substantially reduced. They see that as a solution to the issues of many of the issues of concern that they may have, and not just the health issues, but the impact that it has on property values of their most significant investments, the houses that they live in. And so in Port Arthur, I've been working with an environmental justice group called CETA. You know, one of the first things when we started talking to them about how we could engage with them, one of the first things they said is, Port Arthur, Texas is the best illustration of the presence of fossil fuels and its potential impact on people. Help us to bring clean energy to Port Arthur, not just for public facilities and private facilities, but also installed in our homes. Help us to get the funding and the support we need to install energy efficiency measures in our homes so we can reduce the cost that we're having to bear. And so I think that's for the organization I work with, that's what we decided we're going to do, is do the job of working with CETA and others to bring in those federal funds. It would be nice to have some funding from the state, get support from the local governments, and then work in partnership to deliver those types of facilities, on the one hand, to critical public infrastructure, so that in times of hurricane and tropical storms and storms and all that stuff, they can be resilient when the grid goes down, but also delivering it into the homes that they live in. And also taking the time to connect, for example, with job training and placement experts, so that the jobs resulting from those investments, the folks who live in those communities have an opportunity to fill. I think if we can build those types of partnerships and arrangements after having listened very carefully to the folks that we are hoping to assist improve their quality of life, I think we have the opportunity to move forward. But and again, I'll pause by saying, if the opportunity to exist to do that for the next 10 years, there is the potential for amazing results, and that's the biggest issue.
Wow. I used to teach government. I taught government for the last 8 years at a university down by the border. And this is a big question. What does energy democracy look like? Thinking in terms of systems. I used to tell my students that structure educates you how to behave. So how many exits does this room have? How you can go to the restroom? It's gonna be up to that, right? Very few people will say, I'm going out the window to go to the restroom. I mean, I love those people. We need those people, right? The same happens with government. So because commissionship deals with the Railroad Commission, we are very cognizant of the structure that has been set to have the possibilities that we envision. So it is complex and layered, but at the end, we're gonna have to tackle the question of system. Is the government of Texas allowing us those opportunities? And as we get together here, you have the tribe Carrizo Come Crudo having a long walk in protest of not being heard. As we are gathered here, you have the legislation meeting, passing bills that are going to prevent us from having those opportunities. So for me, energy democracy means coming together as people, building coalitions, building force to make that structure open for our voice. If we don't start voting, if we don't start getting involved, understanding where does it come from, how much gas Does my electricity use, do I want that in my household? Should I be fighting for something else? Is the agency regulating what I want regulated? Where can I protest? Where can I speak? When can I speak? All of these questions now are laid upon our lap, all of us, and that includes industry, in order to create the future we want. Because industry is becoming very much conscious of the fact that we're running out of resources they are using, but they are moving towards other resources to continue profit. So they're gonna have to listen, right? Let's take this opportunity.
I love the way that we put this panel together because there's so many synergies here, and it's not organic. I mean, this is a very incestuous panel. John serves on my board. I serve on Maria's board. John served on Dana's board a long time ago. Maria's boss worked for John. So we need more people to be a part of this fund that we're having. But it's easy to piggyback off of them because I know them so well, and some of the things that they mentioned in terms of this great question about democratization of the energy future and what that looks like and how that is facilitated. And we actually toyed with the phrase as a tagline, democratizing sustainability, as kind of what we are about, right? And we approach it, in a different way. I love the way that they put it in terms of environmental justice, in terms of actual voting and being participants as citizens, but also in terms of obviously the market structures that are put in place and the cost curves of products, of technology, of new technology. Many of you know already, whenever some new technology comes to market, it costs so much more than a poor person can ever afford to acquire it. And then that same family would have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before that price point reaches to a level where they can participate, right? And so the way that we see the democratization of green technology, of sustainability, is by crushing that price point early now, so that disadvantaged families as well can be full participants today. Right? John mentioned this urgency, the sense of urgency. And if you've ever heard me speak along these lines, I always mention Dr. King's fierce urgency of now. And really that being the gravitational pull that motivates and pushes our organization and me on a day-to-day basis, that fierce urgency of now, that there is such a thing as being too late. And we are in that space now, whether it's the next 3, 4, 5 years. If you have looked at the IPCC's report, that window is shutting very fast. There is a fierce urgency of now. The question is, who benefits, who gets to participate? And if it's only those who have the means to participate, whether that's affluent families or big businesses, and the transition isn't just, it ain't truly a transition, if you excuse my language. And so our goal is to use capital, which is the #1 barrier to a just transition, to leverage capital that's available to us, raise capital in a way that we can empower these families to be able to be participants today and not have to wait until it's their turn, but they can step in and be participants, active participants now, and help to shape their own energy futures.
I want to validate part of what Steve and Maria has said. Maria talks about, what's happening at the federal level today is great. What's happening in many local governments, particularly large cities, is very encouraging. What's happening with regard to in the corporate sector, the energy sector, is encouraging. But the fact of the matter, the state's missing in that. The state of Texas is not moving in the same direction. That's a challenge. That's a problem. And unfortunately, that's a risky thing to say today. But it needs to be said. we need our state government to step up and be part of the solution in addressing the climate challenges and addressing the climate equity problems. And one of the biggest quandaries that I think exists is how can we ensure sustained and significant progress on climate issues, resiliency issues, and equity issues if the state of Texas is not part of the equation and is committing in investments to address these challenges. And one of the things we need, besides the good work that all of us are doing, is there is a need. Let me state it this way. If my board chair and board fires me tomorrow, I will form a political organization, not to go after them. I may have given them good cause to do that. But unless we uplift political dialogue in this state, that in and of itself, the failure to do that can be the biggest stumbling block of all in terms of real progress being realized.
Thank you. My goodness, this time goes really quickly. I'd like to talk a little bit about the connective infrastructure required. How do we build these ecosystems that are necessary to actually help communities realize the benefits of these transitions? John, you talked a little bit about the connectivity of, this isn't just an energy discussion, but it's a housing discussion, it's a health discussion. It's affecting livelihoods of people. What do we need in terms of those connective infrastructure, the connective ecosystem, so that we can have holistic approaches to a just and equitable energy transition?
Well, I think I'm only talking now, y'all, because they looked at me. I was in a meeting with a senior DOE official in December who said, I chair an organization of 18 different agencies, and all of us are coming together across government to try to put together complementary programs to address the huge equity issues that exist across the country. And one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot is how well are we doing in terms of bringing together the experts and the local community champions around all of these different issues. And the idea would be bringing together the folks across housing and education and health and energy and other community improvements. And we develop a local plan and a regional plans, and then taking those plans to Washington, meeting with those 18 agencies and saying to them, we're ready to deliver to Houston, Texas, or Harris County, or Beaumont, Texas. We're ready to deliver a holistic set of programs reflecting the multiplicity of needs that exist that ensures sustained progress on various issues that are at play in the community. And the interesting thing is there is connectivity. If we had time to discuss history and politics, there is great connectivity while all of those things exist in underserved and disadvantaged communities.
In addition to what Mr. Jose said, a bottom up, okay? I love this question of interconnectivity. We tend to walk around without thinking what links us to others. Like if our actions some way exist in isolation. But if we start thinking of interconnectivity, we are going to then realize how our actions have consequences, how our inactions have consequences because this interconnectivity exists. So one of the teachings that Native tribes in the United States has been embedding the environmental community with is this idea of interconnectivity. So when we imagine what that looks like, we need to start considering a communion with the space that we occupy. That means your city. Yes, that means the building. Yes, that means the car you drive. Yes, that means where you're standing. So if you start thinking in those terms, maybe you become conscious of the nature that exists around you. And in that way, build an interconnectivity that shapes what you envision your energy in your community to look like. But do that not only open to each other, but open to those that up to today you have considered the others. So if I belong to the environmental community, I have to be open to industry. I have to be open to those that have contaminated my land. Why? Because I have to understand them, but only by engaging will they understand me and how I perceive my interconnectivity with my space, right? So just wanted to bring you this bottom-up perspective too.
Yeah, that is very powerful, Maria. And to try to add any value to what's already been said, I'm not going to say too much, but just to the point that this poverty and this languishing of the disadvantage is a systemic problem. And it's a problem that is involves a web of other problems. And oftentimes, before you can come to somebody and talk to them about retrofitting their homes and what that might look like, they may first have issues about, food. They may have issues about jobs. They may have issues about hurricane season coming on, and them knowing that where they live is going to be the first place that floods and the first place to lose power, and the place that loses power the longest, and the place that floods the highest, right? And so a part of the work that we do, and those of us in the room who do this work as well, a huge part of it is that foundation of trust that has to be built, and that trust also lends to extending past my focus and understanding the true needs and the concerns and the fears of the communities that that we hope to serve. And know that at times that may mean that the stuff I'm talking about or working on takes a back seat until that level of trust has been made and established, until that family has overcome those other more present dangers, for them to have the freedom and the bandwidth to be able to look at, okay, now how do we move forward from this point, right? And so I think it's important that as we look at what that network looks like, and what those structures look like, and what those systems look like, that we continue to be mindful of the fact that all that we're saying here is that this problem that we're facing has to be an inclusionary problem. It has to be a problem that includes the people who are being hurt and who are suffering to be a part of the solution. And as soon as you exclude them from the conversation, you open them up to exploitation, right? So whenever there's exclusion, there's always exploitation. And so it's important that they're included in the democratic aspects of these things. It's important that they be included on the environmental justice aspect of these things, that they be included on what the future holds for these things as well, and bring them into a safe space while there are protections in place to make sure that they can continue to trust the allies that are formed around them to allow for everyone to grow and to fight back and push back on that temptation that we have in the society that suggests that someone else's gain is my suffering or my hurt. We can all gain. That is not true. there are plenty of public resources and plenty of public goods that can be extended to folks who have otherwise been excluded from them without it hurting us behind these ivory walls, behind these in these suburban areas or wherever we live. We don't have to assume that by allowing more benefit to go to a community that has traditionally been lack of benefits somehow hurts us in our pocketbooks. We can do both.
Thank you. So it's such important perspectives from each of you, and have certainly given us a lot to think about. And with that, I'm sure that the audience is thinking and probably has some questions for us. So I want to make sure that we leave time. Can we move to audience Q&A, please?
Yes, I'm glad, Steve, you mentioned trust, because my experience a couple of decades ago now, working with the environmental community, that the biggest issue was trust. It works both ways. So where is that level of trust in the community in Texas at the moment?
Wow. That is, there are nuances to that question, right? Every region is different. Every region is faced with different, even energy issues and concerns. You know, I would say when we talk about, John alluded to it, and I think Maria alluded to it as well, that there are communities that are seen as sacrifice zones in this state, where not only are those communities surrounded by in the shadows of industry that has been harming their health and their wealth as well for decades, but those same communities are now having more layers of industry being permitted to be built in those communities. And so we look at those sacrifice zones, particularly on the Gulf. I would say that the level of trust is not there, right? It is definitely missing, and those are more or less some of the ground zero, if you will, of our work. You know, John mentioned the Golden Triangle. Maria mentioned areas in the Rio Grande Valley those are some of the, not only are the ground zero for those issues that need to be addressed, but those are also the places where energy poverty is too, right? And so it's hard to disconnect the two, from the environmental justice sacrifice zones in our state, as well as the energy poverty areas in our state are usually some of the same areas. And so I would say the level of trust in those areas there needs to be more attention paid to building trust in those communities, and then doing something about it as well. I think the outcomes that folks are hoping to see isn't just a function of, you know, fighting for stuff. It's about changing things and seeing those things change around it.
If I can, I would like to mention that there is this great opportunity taking place right now. Okay, where there is a marriage between science and the passion for action. I'm gonna call it that, okay? If you really, truly want to build trust with communities you have hurt, this marriage offers a great opportunity for conversation, because believe it or not, the environmental community also bases their perspective, not only in experience, which is highly valuable, but now they're backing it up with the science that can be useful in this transition. So I just wanted to mention that it's like I've been hurt, but how can I act now? We are no longer victims. We want to take power over our own destiny, and therefore we want to engage with you into how that best looks. I'm sorry I'm saying with you, I have no idea who you are, but you know what I mean, right? With those that have heard those communities. Yeah.
Thank y'all for this. It's really interesting. I am wondering if y'all could elaborate on a conflict I have in my own head about that. You know, a lot of the issues we're talking about today and over the last week and around the climate crisis are globally felt. So, you know, CO2 emissions have impacts on communities globally. A facility that emits, an air pollutant is more local. But then as we think about trade-offs of different technologies, how do we kind of balance like the environmental justice around, say, mineral resource extraction in the Democratic Republic of Congo and, the voice that those people should have versus if one community wants solar panels that, rely on mineral resources. So I'm wondering y'all's thoughts on that. Thank you.
Can I answer that? Yeah. I love that question. It's very Texan, right? It's very we have all your interest in the state and how can I manage that balance? That is a fantastic question. And I am going to suggest to every landowner, I got involved into this organization commission shift because I had a landowner approach me because they felt they were being taken advantage of by industry. And they wanted to kind of form an association that kind of brought about these landowners' perspective into the political realm. So all I can tell you is landowners are feeling some of the same experiences that communities that have suffered with a long time with agency and governments in the state of Texas not listening to them. So I would tell you, start engaging. That is my only answer. You want to change your community, engage with your community. You want to change your state, engage with your state. You want to change an agency, engage with that agency and engage with those partners that are out there that you're not aware of in order to change that. Because your self-interest on those mineral rights can actually become questionable in the future according to what that agency prioritizes. And that's already been happening. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
And I would add this.
Yeah.
Let's insist, let's make a commitment and insist that we're not just focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Let's focus on reducing all emissions because we want to address the causes of climate change, but we also want to address the issues that the health issues that many communities are burdened by because of air toxics and various other harmful pollutants.
And I will just add a little briefly to that. There are a lot of organizations who live in these sacrifice zones in Texas and Louisiana in particular that routinely work with partners in other parts of the world who are facing similar issues. And I work with a lot of those groups. And so I think part of the solution is to tear down those barriers between communities that are facing one set of environmental, issues one place and another set somewhere else, and allow them the opportunity to compare notes and work together and advocate together, whether it's a COP or any other gathering, global gathering, but ensure that they are empowered to have their voices amplified in a unified way and tell the world with clear eyes and with a open mouth what those challenges are in their communities, and for folks to listen to what their concerns are.
Thank you all so much. I have had the privilege of working with community groups across Louisiana and Texas and have heard environmental justice leaders call new technologies like carbon capture and hydrogen false solutions being pushed by the same oil and gas industry that essentially has gotten us into this mess. And so my question for you all is, how are your organizations working to mitigate harm from these technologies that are coming? The federal government has invested billions of dollars. It's out of Pandora's box, right? So carbon capture and hydrogen are coming, and they're going to be here. How are your organizations working to mitigate harm from those technologies?
I'll take that one.
I know Maria's organization is very involved.
Active in that. That's because it's under the Railroad Commission, right? So the approach Commission Shift is taking, the strategy that we are taking is not only educating the people on what this technology actually means, because there is a lot of misinformation. So op-eds have already been popping up in small towns that favor CCUS. Op-eds have already popped up that favor hydrogen and actually promote them as this, we're calling this greenwashing, right? Now, what we are doing is we are tackling it at the center, at the Railroad Commission. So we have been involved in the primacy process. We have been communicating with the EPA to make sure that the rules that are going to guide, quote unquote, this practice are well established right before it happens. That's one aspect. The second aspect is we have been promoting this questioning of placing the Railroad Commission as the authority to handle this. Why? Because in Texas, we have talked about this already, there is a preference for oil extraction. And that's rooted in our ideology. You know, we're gonna have to come face to face with that, right? And so we have to, I lost my train of thought, but what was I saying before I said face, come to? Informing the community is one aspect, then, oh yeah, we are questioning this authority that the Railroad Commission is inheriting because they have a history of bad practice, right? Right now they have thousands of orphan wells, and there's orphan wells that right now are infecting the land, are infecting the water. They're questioning whether it falls under their authority to plug them. So imagine how well they can handle CCUS. So right now, that's how we are handling it, okay? But we are doing it by engaging communities, by attempting to engage the industry who has already developed contracts. They haven't answered many of our questions, but that's why I'm saying attempting, but we're trying to engage. We do believe engagement matters. So we're also engaging with the EPA. We're also engaging with the Railroad Commission, okay? So that's how we're doing it.
And I think a multifaceted approach. I was talking to an environmental justice advocate, I want to mention his name, and we were talking about the potential for hydrogen hubs being created along the Gulf Coast. And he shared with me his concerns. He said, but how this particular potential project is going to potentially receive $1 billion from the federal government. If we can leverage 40% of that, if we can leverage 40% of the benefits to flow to disadvantaged and underserved communities, that's huge. So he said, I'm going to fight my battle over here of trying to stop them, or if they are built, making sure that they can operate in safely and bring about meaningful environmental regulations. He said, however, we need some folks to go connect with the companies that are seeking that money and press as hard as you can to try to get the 40% of the benefits to flow to these disadvantaged communities. And so we kind of talked about it. And I said, well, I have some of the same concerns you've got. So he said, well, why don't you go focus on the 40%? And we'll focus on making sure that EPA and DOE do their jobs well. But besides doing that, what we've decided to do is to focus on is go engage with communities where these facilities are going to be located and educate them on what's coming and work with them to try to help empower them to be able to bring to the table and to press for the important environmental safety and health measures to be addressed and solutions developed to resolve all of those issues before we bring online these very significant facilities.
Thank you, John.
Yeah,
And I
real
know,
quickly, I know we gotta go real quickly.
Okay.
I think it's important that we bring this full circle to the question that this young man raised, the very first question around trust. The expectation that you are going to tell us that the extending the useful life of this legacy fossil infrastructure to decarbonize something somewhere, somehow, and I'm supposed to sit back and trust you now after you polluted my air, you polluted my water for generations, is a tall ask to try to make. You don't have that moral authority to tell me that this is a solution based on the very infrastructure that you use to poison me, right? And so, you know, let's start there. Let's slow down. And before we rush to, you know, these grand solutions that may ultimately only end up in more carbon emissions, may ultimately end up in more recovery aspects of the upstream process, let's slow down and let's come to grips with what the true facts are, what the true science is, and help us to trust you in delivering on these promises. And I think that is the place where the disconnect lies. It's going to lie in the trust that these communities have with an industry that they have no reason to trust.
so important, so important. Thank you. Please join me thanking our panelists. I know we have to move on for an important discussion.